Lennon with the, would you welcome Diane for the Unity Magazine review? Welcome back, Diane. And unmute and we're set.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everybody. I'm here to review for you the latest Unity magazine, which has finally arrived, and that is the September-October edition. I hope you can see that. So basically, I'm going to review 3 articles for you. I've chosen these 3 because they all have a similar theme, which is seeing more clearly. And the first one is the cover photo here, featuring Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. Now, Don Miguel Jr. is actually the son of the man who wrote this book. And we studied this book a couple of years ago in book club, if you might remember, some of you. And it's called The 4 Agreements, the original book. Very, very well known. And I'll just refresh your memories about what the 4 agreements were. So basically it was, be impeccable in your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. Now, the father and the 2 brothers, his 2 sons, which are brothers, of course, wrote an extra book, and it's called The 5th Agreement. And the agreement there is, be skeptical and learn to listen. So in the context of all this, we've got an interview with Don Miguel Jr., who is a teacher of the ancient Toltec wisdom, as was his father, and which predates the Aztecs. And in this article and in his book, Don Miguel talks about 5 levels of attachment. Level 1 is where we see ourselves as an authentic self. We are an authentic person. That's ultimately what we are. It's not about what we know and what we think. It's about being who we are. And that goes through on the continuum right through to fanaticism. And fanaticism, of course, is where knowledge has completely taken over who I am. And I am everything I think and believe. And I don't even question it. I just think that. And he says, if you become aware or you're in some way that you have become a bit fanatical, what you can do is to ask yourself, is it true? Is it true what I'm believing? Because as we know, there's a lot of what's called fake news out there now, misinformation, paranoia, strange beliefs that people are taking hold of. And this is a way that we can get back to who we essentially are. Now, another article in here, written by a man called Brother James Twyman. I hope you can see this small photo of him here. And Brother Twyman is an American man who has started a spiritual community in Mexico, and it's called Namaste Village. And Namaste, of course, means I honor or I see the God in you. And Brother Twyman is very interested in a practice called Anchoratism. Now, Anchoratism harks back to medieval Europe, and that practice was that in a spiritual community, the renunciates would take time out to withdraw from the world. And they did this actually by staying in the proximity of the church. So the community would actually build a little dwelling attached to the church itself. And this building, this tiny little dwelling, would have 2 windows, one looking out onto the world and the other one looking into the church itself. And there would be 1 door. And when the renunciate entered that dwelling for contemplation, that door would then be bricked up. And so they would be enclosed in that space for maybe sometimes the whole of their adult life. In Brother Twyman's case, he only went in there for, I think it was 9 months before a family matter called him out. But basically his community built for him a tiny little dwelling with a tiny lounge room, a very small bedroom with just a single bed, and a tiny, tiny bathroom. And for 2 days a week, 2 hours a day, the window would be open. One of the windows would be open where food could be passed through to him, or someone might come and check on him. Otherwise, he was left totally to himself. He did, however, have the internet because he felt that was important to keep in touch with people, just letting them know the process he was going through. And his process that he chose for himself was to reflect on a 14th century poem by a monk called The Cloud of Unknowing. Bill knows that, I gather. And his way of trying to connect with that poem was to choose a one-syllable word. It might have been God, or it might have been love. And he used that word with every out breath. He would try to penetrate that cloud of unknowing to give himself greater knowledge. Now, another article here is by a Reverend Ogun Holder down the bottom here. So he's a unity minister in the States, and he feels his mission is, or one of his missions is, to make his spiritual community aware of the fact that he's a Black man living in the States. And of course, that's not an easy role or easy position to be in. And he wants to address his community as a spiritual community because he believes that it's all too common for people on a spiritual path to not be able to connect with, for example, what he's going through. And he sees that because they might use expressions like God doesn't see color, or all is in divine order. And he feels that that is bypassing the emotional reactions that he has and situations that he has to deal with. And he calls that spiritual bypassing, an expression that some of you may know. And that means that people might use their spiritual beliefs to avoid difficult or unresolved issues. So instead of dealing with them on an everyday level or an emotional level, they take it up onto a spiritual level and say, well, look, don't worry because God doesn't see color. So in other words, everything's okay, but everything is not always okay for him. And so he feels it's important to try and get this message out there. And he's also written a book about this. And lastly, it's the 4th year in which the Walden Awards are being featured. And the Walden Awards are honouring people who use New Thought principles in their work and in their lives. There are many honorees, but I've only chosen a few that we actually know or are familiar with. So there are 2 here under the category of mind, body, connection and healing. So there's Joe Dispenza up the top here. I think you can see that. And Anita Mujani as well. And then the Lifetime Achievement Award is actually won this year by Catherine Ponder. That's her down the bottom here. And she is now well into her mid-90s. She was ordained as a Unity minister in 1958. And as we know, she's written a lot of books, many of which we have in our library. And many of us, in fact, have been brought to Unity by Catherine herself. So a well-deserved award. Thank you.